On the line with us, our good buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, and filmmaker. His latest film, Vigilante, Georgia's vote suppression hitman. GregPalast.com, his website for all the information, Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, welcome back to the program. You've got a piece, your column at GregPalast.com titled The Secret History of a Riot. I found this particularly fascinating. You want to tell us the story?
Okay, it's real simple, is that the Palast investigative team led by Zach Roberts, who infiltrates right-wing groups, has been tracking the guys that planned and instigated the January 6th riot. Ali Alexander, Nick Fuentes, and the others, and Alex Jones too, got inside and was able to, for example, before the January 6th riot, we had Ali Alexander, who is he created the organization Stop the Steal, very close to Donald Trump, who liked to compliment him on being a lookalike to Sammy Davis Jr. But he, with Nick Fuentes and Alex Jones, were holding rallies in Georgia, where we were. And Ali Alexander, for example, with Nick Fuentes, said, if you don't give us Trump, and this is a quote from one of their little gatherings, we will light this S on fire, except he didn't say S. So he was already talking about burning down government buildings if they don't give us Trump.
And when was this?
Now, this is Ali Alexander.
No, when?
Oh, this was about 2 weeks before the January 6th riot. But I should also, there's my assistant crawling around behind me. My cat.
Oh, your cat?
Yes.
Yes, we have a few of those too.
Yeah. So, but at any rate, so this was before. But here's the frightening thing. The frightening thing is that after Ali Alexander, joined by Nick Fuentes, Alex Jones said, we're going to basically burn down government buildings. They were hired, or Ali Alexander was hired by the National Republican Senate campaign, that's Rick Scott's outfit, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, to run a get out the vote drive in Georgia. Remember, January 5 was the runoff for the U.S. Senate seats in Georgia back in 2021. So you had the January 5 runoff. Ali Alexander was in Atlanta. I have pictures of him with the GOP get out the vote people, and they're all yucking it up. This is the same guy who just weeks before had been yucking it up with a Nazi with a swastika flag behind him. Now he's yucking it up with the Republican leadership, and he was also hired by the Georgia GOP to run a get out the vote campaign for January 5. And then he took off for Washington. Obviously, we know what happened January 6. Right. But so the question I have, and I try to get an answer from the National Republican Senate campaign and from the Georgia party, why would you hire Ali Alexander? This is after, not before. They have no excuse. This is after he was threatening to burn down the government buildings, and he said, we will have riots. So, you know, already this was, and why, what I'm concerned with is that the January 6th committee did not look into this. And I don't know whether there was some off-limit agreement with Liz Cheney or whatever, but there was no discussion of putting these rioters on the Republican payroll.
I suppose the good news is the Republican Party finally found a black guy that they could do business with.
Well,
sorry to sound so terribly cynical. You know, it
was cynical. Putting up Herschel Walker to run for the U.S. Senate was about as cynical, and actually a lot of black people thought it was quite racist. He actually got fewer black votes than the white woman running against Warnock 2 years earlier.
Yeah, it was almost like, let's find black people who represent the worst caricatures of black people in the minds of racist white people and put them forward to reinforce those stereotypes. I mean, that was certainly the case with Herschel Walker. I don't know about Alexander. But, you know, my rant today over at Hartmann Report is about basically, you know, the fact that 2 years have passed and none of these people, Ali Alexander and all the rest of them, none of them have been arrested. None of them have been indicted. None of them have faced any serious consequences. I mean, the grunts, these poor, pathetic people who you know, obsessed on Facebook and became convinced that the election had been stolen from Donald Trump by Jewish space lasers and you know, corrupt voting machines. They showed up, and they're going to prison. So, you know, the dweebs got it. They got nailed, or they're getting nailed. But the ringleaders, the conceivers, the ones who came up with the plot, the ones who participated in it, knowing full well that Trump lost the election, all of them appear to have skated for a full 2 years. Do you have any understanding, can you share any insight with us as to why the Biden administration and the Garland Department of Justice, would go so light, basically ignore these guys?
Well, I'm going to do two answers. One, I want to contrast it with Lula's response in Brazil to the almost twin riot that just happened in Brazil yesterday.
Steve Bannon has been promoting for weeks, by the way, on his podcast.
Yes, so there's quite a bit of difference. Now, number one, as I pointed out in my article at gregpalast.com, the history of, I guess I should call it Hidden History of a Riot, in violation of police procedures that are in the National Police Procedure Manual and the FBI Procedures Manual, they did not seal off the Capitol. The cops and the various military forces did not do what you're supposed to do, which is to take everyone's name, get their cell phones with all their incriminating selfies and incriminating evidence. You don't normally.
There wasn't a single arrest that day, was there?
Yeah. No, there wasn't. They actually gave them a police. So you take perpetrators where you had a dead policeman and other dead people, tremendous damage, according to every police manual. In fact, I just had a stray bullet hit a window in a bar in my neighborhood here, believe it or not. And they sealed off everyone in the building, just anyone who could possibly be a witness. You get their names, you get any evidence. No one is allowed to leave. And why were they allowed to leave? This is a really important question. Like, who allowed them to leave? And I think one of the things that we're going to find out that we're very concerned about when we were covering remember, there was a demonstration also in December where you had the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. Right. They were being allowed up the steps of the Capitol.
Yep.
While our guys, like our guy Zach Roberts, who actually has a congressional and White House press badge, if he stepped on the steps of the Capitol, they would arrest him right off, despite his police badges. And yet they were allowing the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys. They were fist bumping with some of the cops. So One of the problems is we have an infiltration. Let's be honest about it. We don't know what extent it needs to be investigated of the white supremacists and the riot sympathizers.
Last week in New York City, you had a bunch of Proud Boys show up to trash a drag show, and the police escorted them down to the subway afterwards, after these guys, threatened and intimidated and nearly rioted. The New York City Police Department escorted them down to the subways, put one token in, and held the door open for them to pass through without paying to get on the subway to go home.
This is a problem. Now, let's be very careful. We did have, as you know, we had some cops who actually gave their lives to try to save our government. But you also unquestionably had cops who were aiding and abetting and letting.
I think it's the two Chris's, Greg. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Chris Wray, who was running the FBI and still is, and Chris Miller, who was running the Department of Defense. Those two seem to be the guys who made the decision about whether to arrest anybody that day, whether to mobilize or not mobilize.
It's simple police procedure. You literally get people's names. You take their cell phones with the incriminating evidence. Why are they on a manhunt 2 years later when you had the perps in hand and the witnesses? Right. Now, this is very different than what Lula has done. He has said, Lula, the president, the newly reinaugurated president of Brazil, has said, number one, I'm going to track down where the money comes from. This ain't cheap. Riots aren't free. Yeah. Where's the money coming from?
And they're rarely spontaneous.
Second, he said it was Jair Bolsonaro, the prior president, just like Trump's close buddy and self-announced imitator of Trump. He said that guy's responsible. He whipped these people up. Well, and he is responsible.
And Bolsonaro's son, Eduardo, went to Mar-a-Lago, hung out with Donald Trump. He was a guest on Bannon's show. He had Trump autograph his Wikipedia page.
But Lula has said this guy is responsible. So you have to understand, Bolsonaro and the security chief for the Capitol in Brasilia have both fled to Florida. They're in Florida now.
Right. I know.
Because they are afraid.
First went to Mar-a-Lago. He was sleeping overnight at Mar-a-Lago this first night in Florida.
Well, if you're in, you'd be sympathetic to a refugee, right? I shouldn't be laughing. It's pretty serious. They remember that at night that they had a military dictatorship in Brazil up until 1985. So when Bolsonaro, what they were trying to understand, what the rioters they were trying to do is trying to provoke the military into taking over the government. Right. So they really had a very dangerous situation. But he's looking at that Lula is looking at arresting those involved, investigating the various police agencies that failed to do their job and why, and will hold them responsible, and looking for the sources of the funding. So he's taking a very aggressive view without trying to tear the nation apart.
Right.
You know, he's not calling for counter demonstrations or anything like that.
Do you think he's going to find any funding sources in the United States?
Oh, yeah. I've worked with Lula before about the issue of this. You know, look, it's a resource nation. You've got
I know,
oil.
you know this guy.
Yeah. And the thing is, I worked disclosure. I worked with his labor unions for years. And no, he's there's a big concern about corporate interests of all types, international, which are in Brazil, who want a more friendly government. As one U.S. executive said, the head of Entergy said, "We like it down there. It's kind of this is before when there's still the military dictatorship. We like it there. It's a benevolent dictatorship. That's how we like business run."
Right.
And that was the U.S.
Let's not forget, IT&T, participated and helped organize the coup in Chile back in 1973.
Yes, so there's a big problem with money, and it goes both ways. I'm worried about Brazilian money. It's a very wealthy nation in influence in the United States, too.
Yeah, it's the largest and wealthiest nation in all of South America, and let us know.
Well, I have a very specific concern, and I hope now, as an investigative reporter, which you know because you see that hat, as an investigative reporter, I usually don't report before I investigate, but if I were still with the Justice Department, I hope that they're looking into George Santos's mysterious $750,000 donation. Did that come from Bolsonaro's buddies to his congressional campaign?
Interesting. I've got another Santos story here. One of his guys imitated Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff and raised $3 million from Republican donors. It's an amazing story. Anyhow, Greg, I got to run. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com. Thank you, Greg.
Bye.